noisy world we pause and hear. A wiser path is becoming clear. Peaceful voices. Welcome, my friends. Thank you for joining us here. I'm very excited to have a conversation with David Ryan Barcega Castro-Harris. David, I'm very happy to have you here to talk about restorative justice. I've heard that you are a teacher and trainer, founder of Amplify RJ, Restorative Justice, and I've had a wonderful time listening to some of the teachings you've been offering online. And so I'm looking forward to the chance to asking you questions and getting excited about possibilities with you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for reaching out and having me.
Mm-hmm. And one of the first questions I like to ask everybody in order to frame the conversation is something about hope. And I've been puzzling over the right kinds of questions. And maybe one way to thinking about it is, let's say in a century from now,
Hmm.
the people there, maybe us, will be looking back and will be looking at this time period and what's going on and the process and the conflict and the transformation and thinking how grateful we are about that change. It was really hard. It was a difficult process to go through, but something about this process allowed us to move forward as a people and to grow as a species and as a community. And I'm wondering, as a way of framing the conversation, what you think you in the future, looking back, would be grateful for and hopeful about now.
I don't know that I think about hope as in that framework. In some ways, I just don't think you have a choice but to be hopeful, or I don't have a choice but to be hopeful, because the opposite of that is despair. And that's not helpful. And don't get me wrong, like I've had moments of like feeling really bad about the circumstances of the world, or like my personal circumstances, or what's happening in my geographic neighborhood or with people that I love. But the opposite of hope to me is giving up, and that just doesn't seem like an option.
So is it kind of just your own tenacious character, your desire to keep moving, or what are you moving toward?
I don't know that it is like I don't know that it's let's like you say it like it's like valor, like there's valor behind that. And I think it's just like, well, what else am I gonna do? um right. There are specific practices that help promote like the keep going of it all. Being in community with people definitely helps, staying attached to community. So like you see that like while you might not be pushing the ball forward on a global scale, like you are making small impacts, like that is helpful. But yeah, like I just don't know that I could do anything differently.
Well, we are all very grateful for the work that you're doing and for the way that you are, even if you couldn't change who you are. I think that you are clearly making a difference. And I'm curious about what it is that you're focusing your work around now through Amplify RJ and your work within the community.
Yeah. So Amplify RJ exists as it's a company, but it is also a mission to literally amplify RJ, which in this context means restorative justice. I'm someone who came to restorative justice work through a lens of like, what are alternatives to the criminal legal system? But as I learned more, and we can get into that if you want, I embraced it as a way of being through like living values of interconnection that Indigenous people across the world have practiced for time immemorial. And, there are lots of reasons why we in our Western context have been separated from that, but those values still exist within all of us. And so, if you think about words like Ubuntu or Kapwa or like even like Namaste, it's like we are connected. I see you in me. And so like, let's treat each other accordingly. That means when, there's conflict or harm, we should work it out because like we want to work things out with ourselves, right? Instead of like chopping off my arm because like I got a scratch. What am I going to do? I'm going to repair that. I'm going to repair that. Um, Punishment is often just causing more harm and not necessarily meeting people's needs. And so when I think about restorative justice through the way that it developed in our Western context through Howard Zer and others, they describe a process of navigating conflict and harm that essentially asks the question, what happened, who was impacted and how, and what needs must be addressed in order to make things as right as possible, and then who's responsible for meeting those needs. That framework can help us navigate so many of life's issues, both in response to conflict and harm, but also proactively as we're thinking about how are we building relationships rooted in equity and trust.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And I guess what I would say in addition to that is when I think about the work of Amplify RJ, it is teaching those like simple principles in specific context because I think in much of the world, when we think about the words like justice, we do think about the criminal legal system. And I intentionally don't say the criminal justice system because a lot of the times you're not getting justice there. But the criminal legal system is often asking questions like what happened, not what happened, sorry, what rule or law was broken, who did it, and what punishment does that person deserve? And that is not necessarily conducive to meeting people's needs. And that often gets adjudicated unfairly. And it often doesn't involve the people who are most impacted in the decision making. And so making sure that people in their day-to-day lives, as well as when they're thinking about things on a communal or global scale, think about like, hey, are we really centering the needs of the people involved in this? Let that be our guiding light instead of, well, this is the rule and this is the mandatory punishment for this. So let's make it happen. It would change a lot of the way that we interact with each other.
Hmm. Hmm. Can you to step back just to um, give appreciation and reverence for the people who came before and these traditional systems of wisdom that we're now making use of now. Do you
Mhm.
mind speaking a little bit more about where these methods come from, the heart of them, and then how they're being expressed now in our modern world?
Yeah, can you clarify methods?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm thinking again, I'm still new to
Yeah.
RJ, but I'm curious about is you're talking about, for instance, like the First Nations,
Mhm.
how a specific group of people and they have this ancient wisdom tradition. They've worked hard, and then it was sort of washed away. But that tradition and that wisdom, those systems are still being shared now. And I'm just curious about mm, if you can speak a little bit more about where these systems come from when you're referencing these traditional methods.
Yeah. So I can speak to a specific context, and I will in a moment, but I want us to just in our mind's eye imagine what life was like when our people lived in groups of 50,
Hmm.
wherever that was across the world. When you live in a group of 50, everyone is a vital part of your community, right? And it's really clear to see the values of interconnection. And so everyone has a job or task that they do in their community. Everybody has their roles, responsibilities. Everyone has the ways that they benefit the community. And inevitably, when people are in community together, there is conflict and people cause harm because people do human things, right? And so when there is conflict and harm in a community that small, what are you going to do? Are you going to kick that person out of your community? If you do that, there are a couple likely outcomes. If society is built around groups of 50, a person out on their own is probably going to die. Or they could join a rival tribe, right? And then tell them all of your secrets, and then they can come steal your resources. The other thing that might happen, though, and that probably will happen, is that one person who caused harm in a maybe really egregious way was contributing to your community in lots of different ways that had nothing to do with that harm. And so when you take 2% of your workforce away from your community, that actually significantly harms your community. When you take away a parent from a family, when you take away a partner from a family, when you take away a son or a daughter, when you take away somebody who played like really important roles, even though that person caused harm, the people who are now missing that person are also harmed. They are missing someone. And so it is in our best interest to make sure that we figure out ways to repair the harm, not to excuse the thing that the person did, Not to say like, hey, that's okay, but it's to say that, hey, you're a really valuable, important part of our community, and we want to be in good relationship with you. And so, how can you make corrections, make repair in order to make things as right as possible? And what are the things that we can do to support you in that process? What are the things that the people who have been harmed by your specific action need in order to be made whole or as right as possible? And that is where a restorative process happens, right?
Mm.
Maybe it's sitting around a fire talking in a circle. Maybe it's a council of elders facilitating that conversation. Maybe that is just a one-on-one conversation. But at the end of the day, you're essentially still asking what happened, what's the impact, what are the needs created by that impact, and who's responsible for meeting those needs, right? Because it's not necessarily the responsibility of the person who was harmed to help meet the needs of the person who caused harm, right? Because both of those people have needs, and a lot of times people who cause harm are trying to get their needs met
Mm.
through harmful ways,
Yes.
right? And so what is the way that the community can support all parties involved?
Mm.
So this method of navigating conflict and harm has existed everywhere,
Mm.
right? And there are specific formats and traditions around those processes, but the way that this was brought into the Western context is often cited through what the Maori people were doing in
Oh,
New
wonderful.
Zealand, right? And so, much like the indigenous people in the United States are overly criminalized percentage-wise, indigenous people in New Zealand are also overly criminalized, overrepresented in the criminal legal system. And so, Maori elders went to the youth courts in New Zealand and said, "Hey, instead of having our young people who are struggling go through your process, let them go through our process and like let us take care of this in community." And through that and inspiration from lots of different other traditions, like what we're talking about across the world, this practice of restorative conferencing came to be often through like a framework of victim offender mediation or victim offender conferencing. But that is the way that it was popularized in the late 70s and onto now. And it's reformed in some ways the criminal legal system. It's been brought into schools, in some contexts, workplaces, and practice all throughout different communities. But that is the way that those practices, those methods, that again have existed for time immemorial. Have been one that they still exist in indigenous communities. They exist within your family, probably, right? Um, and they're being remembered, right? Because these are a part of us. And we have to push back against punitive, colonial,
Yeah.
oppressive systems that have been established to extract, to dominate people. Because a punitive approach is simply about controlling people's behavior and hoarding power. And we see that in so many different ways.
It's true. Gosh. Thank you for that. How wonderful. The the framework that you're describing, this, what happened, how do we repair the situation? Can you talk a little bit about that framework?
So what happened? Who was impacted and how? What needs must be addressed in order to make things as right as possible? And who's responsible for meeting those needs? I think a fifth question is how are we going to make sure that we follow up with the things that we just said right now? Because that's important. It's like a nice thing to come up with an agreement that like you speak or write on a piece of paper, but if you don't follow up on that, you're still causing harm. Um, what happened to the extent possible you are trying to describe the objective truths of what happened, what was said, what was done by who,
Hmm.
what was happening right before, what was happening right after, what is the relationship history between those people, right? What are the contexts that that conflict happened in? What are the ways that people are able to what ways do people have of solving conflict in this community? Like what happened?
Hmm.
The impact, right, is how was the person who received harm or impacted harmed? Like, and what were the needs that they have, right? So, and then similarly, like I said, like people who cause harm also have needs, right? They did the thing for a reason, right?
Yes.
Most people, I know there are some people, but the vast majority of people don't wake up in the morning and say like, how can I cause devious harm today? Right? How can I mess up somebody's day? From small things like, hey, today I'm going to cut off the person in traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my mission this morning. Or, hey, I'm gonna yell at my kid,
Yeah.
or I'm gonna kick my dog, or I'm going to say something racist. Nobody wakes up. The vast majority of people don't wake up thinking that, right? They're going about their day trying to get their needs met. When that comes in conflict with your needs or your convenience or your feelings, is where there is often conflict or harm. And so, you know, thinking about both people's needs is really important. Not to justify the actions that happened, but acknowledging that those actions came from somewhere. So
Mm.
figuring out what the impact was on both people, because oftentimes when people cause harm, they get defensive, they feel shame, they feel angry, they feel sad, they feel isolated, they feel alone.
Yeah.
And people who cause harm and who have been harmed often feel really similar things, right? When you've been harmed, you also generally feel sad, hurt, angry, maybe alone, maybe isolated, maybe misunderstood, right? Those feelings are the same. Of course, like you're able to, the things that you need to address those feelings are different on either side, but understanding that both people who have caused harm and who are harmed need really similar things is a really important step to take. And so when you have understanding of the impact, you get to start to look at the specifics of, okay, so what do these people need? Right. And maybe later we can break down an example of a situation of conflict. But when we think about, hey, what do I need to feel safe? What do I need to feel a sense of belonging? What do I need to feel understood? What do I need to feel seen, validated for the way that this hurt me?
Yes.
That might look like an apology, right? That might look like communication about like intentions. Not that intention excuses impact, but like it does give understanding and like helps us figure out a way to address things differently moving forward. And then similarly, okay, so the person who caused harm, like what do they need? To one, to apologize, right? Two, not do that again. But what if they don't know how to not lean into that harmful behavior? So they need that support. And again, not necessarily coming from the person who they hurt, but what are the supports that they're being given? And so, there are frameworks of like smart agreements that you can use, like specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound that
Uh,
you could get into. There are methods to make sure that, there is follow up depending on context. This is a conversation that could happen between two people. Could be something that is facilitated or mediated. This might involve multiple people because, harm is often complex and doesn't happen in a vacuum.
yeah.
But in general, that is the way that you walk through a process, coming to an agreement about understanding the needs and figuring out who's going to meet those needs, and follow up.
Hmm.
Is there something that is on your mind that like you would want to like pressure test this against?
Well, I feel like this entire framework, so speaking as a monk, that this entire framework is the same kind of healing system we would apply to ourselves and to the space around us in the community. And at a larger space, I can look around and see how this would be healing for nation states who have been at war for a long period of time. And it's just such a it feels so attainable, but
Hmm.
I recognize that there are some pretty specific blockages, whether it's a single person's ego or treaties that have been signed that kind of create long-term conflict or economic damage,
Hmm.
reparations that need to happen. And so I recognize it's not as simple as simply applying the formula, at least in a larger context. But I am curious about places in the world that you have seen where this has been applied effectively, where we can look and say, oh my gosh, look how much better this works than we see over here.
Yeah, I want to start small. So maybe monastery?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe in the monastery, right?
Okay.
Someone like you have a communal kitchen, right?
Mhm.
And someone ordered some beans and someone who was new like cooked them with lard,
Oh
right?
no. Yes.
Right? And that is harmful for that community, right? And that person probably didn't say like, oh, like let
No.
me add meat products and mess up these people's diets. It was probably like, oh, this is cheap. This is how I know to cook things,
That's
and
right.
I'm gonna make that. We
Yeah.
can use a restorative process to say, hey, what happened?
Mm,
Meat was introduced in the process of cooking food, and that goes against our beliefs. Like,
mm,
how would you feel if someone fed you beans that had lard?
hmm. Well, the first thing I would want to do is to,
How do you feel? How would you feel?
oh, how do I feel? Oh, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
Hmm. Uh, I would personally want to,
Feel.
hmm. Well, it's never happened to me before, but I would probably feel sick to my stomach. I would have
Hmm.
that sense of uh, oppression in my body, that um, desire to eat something different.
Yeah. Let's try to stick with feelings.
Okay.
You would feel disgusted,
Oh,
revolted, both
maybe.
that you consumed that.
Hmm.
And I heard like a little bit of guilt, right?
Hmm.
That was something that you consumed.
Hmm.
Surprised, shocked,
Surprised, certainly. Hmm.
maybe betrayed by the person who provided that because this is coming from a place that you trust,
Hmm.
right? And I don't know the specifics of your kitchen, right? But generally, people who provide food, like it's a source that you can trust, right? And so you might feel a sense of betrayal,
Hmm.
right? What are your needs? And that's where you get into like to eat something different, right? But what else do you need?
Hmm. To have a conversation about it, especially since I'm often the one in charge of the kitchen, I would want to make sure everyone who ate was okay.
Yeah.
Uh, I would want to um, make certain that the person who did the cooking knew not to do it again,
Hmm.
but also that we appreciated that they made something for us. There's a need to make sure that that person is also protected. Hmm. Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How could you go about meeting those needs?
Conversation to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a cleaning process.
Hmm.
Very useful, practical steps, and uh, maybe making it easier for people to cook beans in the future using non-animal products, for instance.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so let's flip it around to the person. And I don't know exactly under what context this could happen within, I didn't know that you were the person who did the bulk of the cooking, but like, let's imagine there's somebody new
Uh-huh.
who was covering for you because you were sick, right? And they went shopping and like, hey, this is how I know to prepare. How do you think they feel
Hmm.
once they understand that they made a decision that caused harm? How do you imagine they would feel?
I can imagine they'd be at first, uh, maybe yeah, they would feel shame. They might feel defensive.
Hmm.
I'm assuming that they were doing it, like you said, not to be malicious, but they were trying to give a gift.
Hmm.
And I've had that experience where I've given a gift and discovered that you've made a mistake along the way. And then maybe initially there's that sense of protecting yourself. You want to make sure that they know. And so there's an over explaining that happens, that rush of heat in your body when you realize, oh no. And so
Yeah.
I'd want to mitigate that for them as well to make sure that they know, nothing terrible has happened, just that we want
Yeah.
to do it differently in the future.
Let's try to focus on their feelings, right? So they feel probably defensive,
Hmm.
also probably like shocked and horrified because like let's assume that they were just offering a gift and like, hey, I cook beans the way that I normally cook beans, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Um, and maybe there's a sense of like, oh, so I'm not good enough,
Oh, sure.
right? Maybe it's a sense of, oh, these people are never going to want me around anymore. I did something horrible. What do they need?
Mm-hmm. Maybe space to process and then an opportunity to speak without feeling judged.
Hmm. What else?
To know that they're safe in a space that's compassion filled and an opportunity to cook beans differently.
Yeah. So like both an opportunity and learning about how to cook beans differently
Yeah,
because, that's just how they grew up doing it. They didn't know a different way.
that's
And
right.
I'm using this, and you're right, this can happen through conversation. And like I'm using this like relatively low stakes
It's wonderful. Yeah.
um conflict.
Mm.
It's real, right? Like I saw your reaction when I brought that up, right? It would evoke real feelings. It would be real harm. But I just talked about someone who thought they were doing a good thing, um, offering something to their community, and it ended up being harmful
Yeah.
based off of their socialization, the way that they were raised.
Hmm.
How many people with racist ideas grow up thinking that, like, I'm doing what's best for my community? I'm going to go to war for these people.
Yes.
I'm going to follow these unjust laws. I'm going to do all these things. Not maybe not even understanding the consequences, right? I'm doing what's right. And so when you think about where this is played out on large scales, right? The situations people often refer to on global or like nationwide scales are, post-apartheid South Africa,
Yeah.
post-Rwandan genocide, post Irish Civil War, right? Instead of executing, jailing everybody who participated in war crimes, genocide, apartheid, terrorism, what have you, there's a process of truth and reconciliation where people are able to name the harm that they caused. And in many of these contexts, like be absolved, or like reintegrate into society in a way that is makes them accountable enough. And that everybody can criticize each of those processes differently, but it didn't end up with half the country being killed or half the country being jailed,
Gosh. Yeah.
right? Um, Understanding that that's no way to have a country moving forward,
Mm.
having literally like half of your people being not a part of your community, right? Like we talked about at the beginning, you kick one person out of your community, um, in a community of 50, that's 2% of your workforce. Think about any of those individual conflicts, and you're talking about like large segments of the community. Your country can't run,
Mm-mm.
right? And so, what are the ways that you're going to move forward, reintegrating them back into your community? I'm not saying that those large scale processes were entirely restorative and actually got to accountability. There are still problems that exist across identities and power with the way that those played out, but at least it didn't end up with people in like large swaths of the population ending up in jail or like
Yes.
in work camps or dead, right? Um, you can scale it down and think about individual cases that happen within the context of the criminal legal system, from things as serious to murder and sexual assault to things as relatively low scale as theft, property damage. Oftentimes, right, the people who are causing harm are coming from circumstances where there are real needs, and not that those needs justify their actions, but what are the ways that we are addressing their needs without removing them from society permanently or, killing them? Because, like, again, like if we follow the logical conclusion of an eye for an eye, right? Like, right, the whole world goes blind.
Yeah.
But because we all cause harm and we all have been harmed, and so what is the way that we're going to move forward together in a good way, in good relationship? Not necessarily best friends, right? But in a way that we're getting as many people's needs met as possible. It's easier to think about the ways that this happens within interpersonal relationships. It happens a lot easier when there aren't systems involved, and whether the systems are the criminal legal system or a workplace where there are HR procedures that need to be followed, or a school where there are rules in place. And, all of those can be bent, right? But there are just lots of different ways that a restorative process can play out in a way that preserves the humanity of the people involved, doesn't cause more harm or minimizes harm, and make sure that people who engage have a say in what happens. Because so much of what a punitive process is power over, ooh, power over dynamics where people who have hierarchical power are making decisions over those
Right.
who um, are most impacted.
Mm. Hmm. How much of restorative justice work aims toward modifying those systems? Or do people tend to focus mostly on how to work within those systems and structures of power?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask, right?
Huh? Yeah.
Um, I think like there, when we specifically talk about like the criminal legal system, everything that's happening in there is reform, and you know that is harm reductive, and no shade at the people who are doing that. I do think that's helpful work. Sometimes I'm challenged by the use of the framework of restorative justice
Mm.
when what is happening is a glorified diversion program, which like I'm all for diversion programs, but a lot of the times when we think about the needs that have been created by someone, a young person has a drug charge, intent to distribute charge, right? Not a possession, but like intent to distribute, right? What needs have been created and what needs does that person have, right? The needs that have been created are more harm probably in their community, more dependency on whatever narcotic that it was. They might have put someone at themselves or someone else at physical risk. There are lots of things that happen within the context of selling drugs that are unsafe. But what are the needs? The needs are for that person to stop,
Yeah,
right? What are the needs that that person has? I'm sure they would love to stop if they had other opportunities,
that's right.
right? If they had other support, right? And so oftentimes there are supports within those systems that our employment programs help with getting licenses, IDs, all those things, financial education, and like those things are positive. But what responsibility is the capital S state taking for creating the conditions, whether it's redlining, whether it's tax incentives like being lifted from public education so that person grew up in an economically like underinvested area, right? The state is not taking responsibility for that. They're just like, well, here, fix yourself now, right? Here's this program that you can fix yourself in now. And so it's not like I have a problem with that being framed as restorative because you're not really addressing the conditions that were created. It's just like, well, here, now that you've done this harmful thing, fix yourself,
Yeah.
right? And for an individual, I think that's helpful, right? But it's not really addressing what has been created. And so, I've been a part of initiatives that have supported people who have been charged with crimes and who have been incarcerated. Uh, those are helpful. And I'm forgetting the question because like I was going to go somewhere else. But
No,
can you
no,
remind me of the question?
keep writing. We were just chatting about the possibility of structures changing and things, but
Oh, yeah. But then like so that's like the reformist approach. Um I don't know how familiar you or your listeners are with the concept of like abolition or prison industrial complex abolition. It's
assume
that
it's a new concept for people because it's always
yeah,
better to reach out to that group.
sure. And so I don't know if I'm paraphrasing Miriam Kaba or Ruth Wilson Gilmore when they say we have outsourced our conflict resolution to the state and outsourced our community care to social services,
Mm,
right? And so an abolitionist lens says, what can we do to address the conflict and harm without giving the state more power,
mm,
right? So what are the things that we can do within our community to address these needs? Right. And so instead of this person going to court for having this drug charge, right? What is it that they can do in their community to to the people that they were selling to the people that they harmed
yes.
to make repair? What is it that the community can do to support them to give them an alternative, right? And a restorative process in that way doesn't look like, hey, you've been arrested for this thing. Now go to this process. It's people in community saying, hey, this thing has caused harm in our community. And what are you going to do to be responsible?
Mm,
Who are the people that are going to support you that you trust or trust enough to make these changes? Maybe a drug charge isn't like a great example. Maybe something that is more easy to digest is, hey, a teenager robs a liquor store
Yeah.
because they wanted money. Let's leave it at the money. It can be more complicated. It's all more nuanced than that, but let's leave it at the money. So they're trying to eat, right? And so they rob a liquor store. The needs that have been created there are the store owner, or whoever was working there, or whoever was in the store feels unsafe in their place of work. There is also the financial damage, which may or may not be able to be covered by insurance because insurance exists. But they've also created harm for their family members or other people close to them because they've put them in this place where they seem like, oh, as someone who's associated with that. The person who robbed the liquor store, right? What needs do they have? They have needs for economic security, right? They have needs, maybe they have needs for belonging or education because they didn't get it and they don't feel like they have a path forward and other ways to move forward. They have needs to make things right, right, with the people who they caused harm, right? Because they do want to be a part of their community, a contributing part to their community. So what can happen, right? Who is it in the community that can have individual conversations with the people involved about, hey, what are your needs? What is the support that you need? And maybe the person who owns the store is saying like, hey, I need this person to pay for the damages. I need them to work this off by working either in my store or working it off some other way. Well, I don't have a job. All right. So who else in the community can provide work opportunities to support this young person, right? That's an abolitionist way of thinking about how we address harm, meet the needs without relying on, without calling the police, right? Without relying on the state to go through a process where someone is going to be arrested, arraigned, right? Maybe jailed if they don't have bail, right? Maybe electronically monitored, probably plea out,
Yeah.
um, and like serve more time, or just have this thing on the record on probation, and that doesn't actually meet anybody's needs because they're still in their community without having repaired that harm. The person maybe had insurance pay for whatever happened, but the emotions that come with that, like, yeah, that person's probably banned from that store, right? But that person still lives in the neighborhood. The people who were in the store, the people who work there, like still feel unsafe. So how are we meeting those needs? The criminal legal system didn't really give us that. And so what are the ways that we can address those in community? That was reductive. Things are often way more complex. But ultimately, when I think about the way that I tend to approach restorative processes, it's about figuring out ways to return the power to the people who have been most impacted and relying on the community instead of systems and structures that are often ill-equipped to meet those needs. I
That
do
makes
think it's helpful when like systems and structures can offer resources, right? Whether that is like people and money,
Yes.
or access to programs and funds. But if they're the arbiters of like who gets what, when, who's deserving, it often gets done really inequitably.
Mm-mm. So the abolitionist perspective is to find alternative pathways around the state, the structures of the state, so that it's in the hands of the community and those who are actually part of the healing process, who know
Yeah.
better how to allocate funds, who know better who to talk to, who's been injured, and how to heal those relationships.
Yeah. So a call to like abolish the police, right, is not mostly about let's dismantle the police department. It's about let's figure out ways to empower our communities to make sure that we don't have to uh, rely on the state, rely on outside enforcers of laws that we didn't necessarily consent to or agree to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
And really, that's not to say that it's like a free for all and like people should steal, right? It's to say that, and transparently, I'm not like fully against stealing, depending on the context. But because like people need things, and when things have been hoarded, and people have been deprived of things, like how else are they going to get them, right? So like I'm not wholly against stealing. I don't think stealing is necessarily violent. Um, but when we're really centering on like what is it that we need to do to provide for our community needs that doesn't force us to rely on the state, like that's where your imagination gets to really run wild about like what the possibilities are. And I think a lot of people are just limited by their imaginations because we don't have time to think about anything else.
Yeah, yeah, which seems by design.
Yeah. And I think like as a younger person, I'm fortunate that I was able to be in spaces and be around people that challenged me to think that because I think if I was to be presented with these ideas newly now as a parent of two young kids struggling to make it under like capitalism, so like I don't have time for this shit, right? Like I'm just trying to like pay the bills, put food on the table. What's the path of least resistance so I can like make make my way through the world with as little stress as possible, dealing with, everything that comes with life now, including, right, my own mental health, my own relationship problems, my own, um, work challenges, and, a kid who peed the bed last night. So, you know,
Yes. Well, and in the midst of all of that, I just want to be part of the community, thanking you for the work that you're doing and the amplification that you are providing so that we can all grow. So even in the midst of all of that, while cleaning the sheets, you are still here taking part in helping lift up the better qualities and better possibilities for our future. And so just in case you haven't heard it quite yet this morning, thank you very much.
appreciate it.
Hmm. And so you've taken us on a wild ride from lard-filled beans to post-apartheid South Africa. And I'm wondering about the spaces within this where you feel that maybe there aren't enough people paying attention to a certain quality of this. Maybe there's a low-hanging fruit which you feel like is available and something that people can pick up more readily than because a lot of this might feel overwhelming. And so I'm
Mm,
wondering where you might
yeah.
direct us.
I really feel like the place to start is with those questions when it comes to not just conflict. We can start with conflict because that's often people's entry into that, but like what happened, who was impacted, and how, and what needs must be addressed in order to make things as right or as right as possible,
Mm.
right? That humanizes people on both sides of conflict very often. And on the other side, there are like other applications to that because like at the end of our conversation we can debrief using that same framework saying like hey what happened here,
Yeah.
what do we think, like what was the impact on you, me, like what do you think the impact is going to be on the audience if we're going to do this again, what needs exist, right, and who's responsible for meeting those needs,
Mm.
right? That framework is translatable to things that are not just about conflict. It's a way about being in good relationship with yourself, with others, right? I can think about the run that I went on this morning and say, like, what happened? Okay, so I started off pretty strong, like pushed a little bit harder in the middle, got really tired, and so I had to like walk the rest, right? What are the needs? Like, what are the feelings that I have? A little bit of shame, right? Because like I used to be faster, stronger, whatever. A little bit tired, but like still some sense of pride, like, hey, I got out there and did it. What
Mm.
do I need moving forward? Get back out there,
Yeah.
right? Try again and like have some grace for myself. Like that framework is translatable to a lot of different things. So that's one thing that I think people can take away. I think the other thing that I would share is, I mean, I do have a YouTube video that like really breaks down like what is restorative justice.
Mhm.
And so, Amplify RJ on YouTube if you're watching this there, or, find Amplify
Links
RJ.
down below.
Yeah, yeah. Wherever I'm most places on the internet. But I use this framework of a tree to talk about how restorative justice is, yes, about getting to healing and accountability and healthy relationships through a restorative process. But if you think about healing and accountability and healthy community as the fruit of the tree, I think restorative processes, that what happened, who was impacted, and how, what needs must be addressed in order to make things as right or as right as possible, are the branches of the tree,
Mm.
right? Especially when it comes to conflict. A branch can't produce fruit without being connected to a trunk and roots, right? And so when we're thinking about the conditions under which like a restorative process or a restorative culture is built, it is also about the way that we're proactively building, strengthening, cultivating our relationships. What are the ways that you're in right relationship with yourself? What are the things that you need to do for yourself, right? Spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally. How are you attentive to those needs for people in your community? How are you identifying those needs? And then how are you attentive to like proactively meeting those needs? How are you aware of your feelings, your emotions, the way that you need to regulate? What are the ways that you need to be sensitive to the ways that you show up in your community at the intersections of all of your identity? What are the ways that you need to communicate? I know many, well, at least Michael in this podcast has talked about nonviolent communication.
Yes.
Um, right? What are the ways that you're communicating with people that connect instead of alienate or dismiss, right? Both through the words you say, like state your need, like feeling, like observation, feelings, needs, right? But also like the nonverbals that come with that, the way that you're asking questions, often open-ended instead of diagnosing. I don't remember what the other 5 Ds of nonviolent communication aren't coming to me in this moment, but right, like what are the ways that you're engaging in your everyday communication? And then really having these core beliefs about the world that like people are good at their core.
Mm.
There's been a lot that cause people to act in harmful ways, but at our core, we're good, wise, and powerful, that we are interconnected, that we actually belong to each other, that we're worthy of being in relationship, right? That we are uniquely gifted and everyone is needed, that we need these practices we need to engage in these practices in order to like unlock the good, wise, powerful self inside. There are all these things that go into being able to engage in a restorative process. And so, yes, take the questions, but also understand that the way that you show up in your day-to-day life also impacts the way that you're going to be able to engage in this work moving forward in building this world that we want, that I think we want. At least.
Let's agree that we want.
Also, sorry, I'll use I language and say
Oh,
the world that I want. Yeah,
oh,
right.
thank you. Yeah. Mm. So much of the process just here in the monastery, this the healing that comes from recognizing that and again, we can speak about the vast majority of people that when we are healthy, we tend to act compassionately. We tend to be kind. We tend to be capable of listening. When we're part of healthy systems, then the actions tend to function in a more holistic, helpful way. That when our bodies are healthy, they heal. When our systems are healthy, we heal. And recognizing that quality of to use a better sense, the goodness that's at the heart of people. That if we recognize that and allow the systems to be based on that possibility, then it changes everything, including the opportunity of conflict, even in a Tai Chi practice, for instance.
Hmm.
That we have this idea that the proof is in the pushing. If somebody pushes on you, then if you are shaped in such a way that conflict actually allows you to stabilize, you become more grounded rather than upset and configured in such a way that you fall over easily or your system breaks apart. But you can structure yourself in such a way that conflict actually, that pressure actually makes you more stable, makes you more yourself, as long as you're within a system that is capable of helping to generate that space. But you have to have the underlying idea that beneath all of that noise, there's the possibility for stability. There's the possibility for peace and harmony and health. And so recognizing that possibility in our systems and in our communities, I feel like is really important because if we approach it with the idea that deep down we're all, dangerous animals that need to be controlled, or any minute now we're going to
Hmm.
break out and tear everything apart, which is how I was raised, that is, I feel like not, you can't hold that idea and move toward this possibility of restorative justice. And
Yeah.
I'm
Uh,
wondering about your thoughts or feelings about that.
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. One, I think there's this acknowledgement that the deck is stacked against us,
Mm.
like through hundreds, if not thousands, of years of indoctrination the to the opposite, right? Saying that like, like, I'm not formally, I'm not. I'm not formally a Buddhist. I was raised Christian. I am not anymore. Christianity being the dominant worldview that shaped the West in conjunction with like imperialism and like white supremacy, right? Where there's like, hey, some people are better than other people. Whether you're like, if you're Christian, if you're white, if you're from a European country, right? A specific European country, wherever that was, whether that was Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, England, France, right? Um, you're better, right? And everyone else who is not is less, right? Um, the colonizers, the imperial powers are wholly smarter, better than. And so, what are the things that we need to do to subjugate everybody else to keep them in those places? Most of society in the West is built on those ideas. And so, like, we have a lot of unlearning to do. There are
Yes.
lots of people who have resisted that in different ways. Lots of people who have preserved different beliefs. Lots of people who have fought against that from like really like egregious things from like chattel slavery to like smaller things in the way that people see like the life and death and potential resurrection of Christ, right? And the way that like is that penal substitutionary atonement or something a little bit more redemptive. And I don't know that we need to go there in this conversation, but we have a lot of stacked against us culturally. And so what it takes for someone to embrace this in a as a life way under these conditions is really someone with a vision for their community. Whether that's someone like me who is like educating and like, hey, maybe you clicked onto this on YouTube or something else and like, oh, like I never thought about this. This makes sense. And like now you have a vision. Now you have an idea. Like I'm not saying that things will change overnight, but you can move differently when the person cuts you off in traffic. You can move differently when someone leaves you on red. You can move differently when someone takes your parking space. You can move differently when your partner leaves the dishes on the counter. You can move differently when your kid says something, when your kid talks back, right? You can move differently when your coworker, boss, someone says something out of pocket, misogynistic,
Mm.
homophobic, right? Understanding that like what's happening, what's the impact, what are the needs, helps you see things differently. But it's really hard to do under the conditions that we're in. And so, having that vision, having something that you're aspiring to, whether that is for you as a person or for yourself as a community, is often really helpful because without that vision, without that imagination, it's really easy to just get stuck in. Well, I'm just going to try to survive here the best I can, leaning
Yes.
on the ways that I've been socialized, the ways that I've been programmed.
Yes. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I've been trying to formulate a way to ask the initial question that I asked about. Imagine you're looking back from the future and seeing this possibility for change. There seems to be this need in humans to have a story, a vision, a
Mhm.
possibility of the way through. How do we imagine a way through? Because if all we can imagine is this is just how this is, you know,
Mhm.
this form of capitalism is just what this is like the end of the possibility for finance and movement, that this kind of justice system is the best that we've got. It can't get any
Mhm.
better than this. And we can't even imagine a different way. And so having people like you who've taken the time to think about it and find a better way through, I feel like your voice and the story that you're telling is really important. And so
Yeah.
mhm, I appreciate
I
you.
I I appreciate that. I also don't know that like I I guess like I don't spend a lot of time thinking about or know that it's a good use of my energy to think about like what the 50 years thing is going to be because like there are just so many like unknown unknowns, right? So it's like what is the thing right now that is true, impactful, and will like help keep the lights on and bills paid and food on the table, right?
Sure.
Yeah. That's
Hmm.
where I'm saying like I don't know that I have a choice. It's not necessarily hope. It's just like these are my skills, this is my knowledge, these are the ways that I can be helpful.
Yeah.
Let's do what we got to
The
do.
seeds that you're
Yeah.
planting.
Yeah.
You're planting these seeds and they're finding fertile soil, and the people who managed to click on this and came across it and said, "Who is this strange guy talking about these difficult things?" But then maybe later when they do come into conflict and they have an argument with their cat about knocking something over, and they think to themselves about something you've mentioned and a possibility, a better way through, even at a small scale like that. I feel like that done 10,000 times in a small space makes a difference to a whole community, to a whole family, and certainly to our character and how we heal as people. And so recognizing that our lives are filled of these small things, you know, 10,000 small choices make a family, 10,000 small choices make that community, make a nation, make a world. And so if everything is made up of these small choices and recognizing that sometimes it's just somebody accidentally cooked the beans wrong,
Mhm.
sometimes it's apartheid, but if it's all made up of these small recognitions of our humanity and the possibility for something better, then maybe that's the way forward.
Yeah,
Mhm. Thank you, my friend.
absolutely.
And so, all of the links that I can find, I will put them down below, and people can come find you and watch the wonderful videos that inspired me to contact you. And uh, and do you have a sense of the action step, the next step that people can take before they finish clicking away from this? What's the step they can take to immediately move forward in this, either education about RJ or to make their own little community safer and better?
I would say just for if you made it this far through the video, I mean, apply the framework, right? What happened here, right? What did you hear, right? How did you feel about it? What's the impact on you? What needs has it created? And what do you need to do to make things right or better moving forward?
Wonderful. David, thank you so much. We appreciate you. I'll keep telling you. And to everybody who followed us all the way through to the end, we appreciate you as well. Thank you for being part of this movement and making the world a more peaceful space. Have a wonderful day.
Peace.
Thank you, David, for your time today, for the stories you carried and the guidance you gave, for reminding us softly that justice can flow through every relationship we choose to grow. From the heart of the household to the noise of the street, restorative justice is carried on our own 2 feet. May courage and compassion keep walking side by side, like rivers returning to the ocean tide. So thank you, good sir, for the wisdom you shared, for speaking with honesty, open and clear. And to everyone listening, wherever you are, may peace begin gently exactly where you are. Peaceful voices drifting through the night, planting seeds of understanding and light.